Monday mornings at Halcyon Consulting smelled like burnt coffee and the soft hum of computers. The open plan floor had the same ritual. Someone would bring in too many pastries, the junior analysts would exchange weekend stories, and the photocopier would cough to life in an oblivious corner. Mara came in the same way she always did, bags slung over one shoulder, headphones in the other. The familiar anxious slide between the rows of desks. She nodded at Anita, who was already logged into 3 spreadsheets, and at Julian, who was arguing quietly with the printer about whether it would accept a glossy stock. On every desk, without exception, there was a blue folder. The blue was wrong. In the fluorescent light, vivid, the kind of office supplies blue that insists on itself. The front had been stamped in bold type, confidential. Mara picked hers up because she had nothing else to do. She flicked the clip loose and slid the paper out. A glossy photo fell into her palm. She recognized the angle before the image coalesced. The bed at the corner of her one-bedroom. The faded poster she'd bought at a student market years ago. The threadbare blanket she only used in winter. Her own face was there, slack and peaceful, hair fanned over the pillow, mouth slightly open. A time stamp glared in the bottom right, 2:12, the night before. Mara's heart beat too fast in the quiet between the ringing phones. Around her, colleagues swore softly, laughed, then stopped. Anita's hands shook as she held up her own photos. Julian looked like he wanted to ask a question, and then swallowed it whole. "This is a mistake," Hollis said from his office doorway. His voice was the voice that usually told them about deadlines and expense reports. Now it sounded thin. "Prank," someone suggested. A laugh broke across the floor, brittle. Mara checked the folder again. At the back, under the photograph, was a single sheet with no letterhead. "Do not share." The instruction read like a second stamp agent. "Personal. No return address. No name." They went to security. Halcyon's security team consisted of 2 people and a bank of grainy monitors that tracked entrances, exits, the stairwells, the elevators. They took the blue folder from Mara with the kind of solemnity reserved for lost laptops and HR disputes. A security officer named Reyes squinted at the timestamp and then called the IT manager in. The first thing the cameras told them was how sleepy footage can be. The elevator logs showed people coming and going at expected times. The lobby camera caught no one suspicious entering with a stack of 50 blue folders. The night cameras, motion sensing and low resolution, recorded what they were supposed to. The janitor passing at 11:30. The emergency lights cycling at 3 in the morning. An empty reception desk at 2. Then someone pointed out the meeting room camera. The clip that covered the hours, from midnight to 3 a.m., had a static shimmer across the entire middle. It was like watching a memory with a bad connection. The edges of chairs, a soft flicker where a person might have walked. Before the shimmer, the room was empty. After it, there was a coffee mug on the table that hadn't been there before. The clip had no sound and no explanation for the mug's sudden appearance. "Camera went bad," security said. IT said the servers were fine. The storage cluster reported no errors. HR said they'd launch an inquiry. Hollis asked everyone to go back to work like nothing had happened. No one did. People held up their photographs and compared. The images were identical at a glance. Sleeping bodies, timestamps, same glossy paper. Under close inspection, they weren't. In the far corner of Anita's photo, there was a pair of shoes turned the wrong way. Julian's had a coffee stain on the sheet that didn't exist in his bed. Small things that were wrong, like a slipped seam in reality. Mara stared at her photograph until the fluorescent light hummed too loud in her ears. There was a detail she hadn't meant to notice. The window behind her in the photo showed a reflection of the room she was in. No, Halcyon's office, dark, empty, with a single shape standing in the doorway. The reflection's silhouette was not any of them. It was smaller, closer to the doorway, like someone who had stepped into the reflection from the wrong side. She blinked, and the shadow was only the window's night glare. "Who printed these?" someone demanded. It felt less like a question and more like a ritual. Something to hold, to keep the world from UNSPOOLING. 3 different printers in the building had logouts and print histories. The logs showed the blue folders as having been printed after midnight on a server that had been offline during the hour the photos were produced. Someone had used a USB drive and traceable physical. Someone who had been inside the building. They all had alibis. They all had download records and keystrokes and GPS apps telling them they had been at home. Still, every desk had a photograph. That night people stopped going home. They said it was to avoid the photos. They said it was to stay together. They said it's better to be awake in a room full of witnesses than alone with an image of yourself. Sleeping, they formed a rotus people. Took shifts at the monitors, coffee in giant pots scraping the last of the cups. They put a calendar on the wall and circled the hours that felt dangerous between 1 and 3 a.m. when the servers made small, indecipherable adjustments and the building lights dimmed for a breath. Mara volunteered to take the 2 a.m. watch. She thought she could prove it was a prank, or at least catch whoever came in and did it. Julian wanted the shift after hers. Anita begged off, saying her eyes kept closing no matter how many pots of coffee she drank at 1:53 a.m. The office lights dimmed in a way that felt like a breath taken and held. On the monitor wall, they watched a hallway outside the server room. The camera feed showed a pale smear where the janitor had walked earlier. Then the image went soft, like watercolors left in the rain. When the image returned, the hallway looked exactly the same except the fire extinguisher had been moved a few inches and a photocopier lid sat on the floor. Open. Loop, a tech whispered. They're looping something. The servers recorded a 15-minute blackout. When the loop ended, the print jobs that had been scheduled for 2 a.m. had completed. Hundreds of blue folders were sent to the printers. The logs said the source IP was internal, but the user account had been wiped. Mara kept watching her photograph as if it could teach her a class. Her breathing measured the light between the building and the city outside. She felt like her own heart was a drum in the night. At home, Mara had a habit she almost always forgot to admit. She slept with the curtains open. She liked the city lights. Her one bedroom belonged to an earlier version of herself, the version who thought curling up under a blanket was an indulgence. She had a small arc of a scar along her wrist from a bike accident 10 years ago, a story she had mostly stopped telling. The scar had been invisible in the photograph. There were no exposed arms until she put the photo under an LED desk lamp and tilted it. Then the lamplight caught something else. Tucked behind her neck on the pillow, half covered by her hair, was a small strip of tape with a smear of blue ink. She did not own any tape with blue ink. A hospital bracelet, a thin rectangular bracelet just like the ones you get after emergency visits. It sat in the photo as if someone had placed it there as an afterthought. Mara gasped. Julian looked up. What? She pushed the photograph toward him. He frowned at the bracelet, then at the timestamp, then at her. You never told me about that, he said. Not a question. Not a condemnation. Curiosity edged with something like fear. It was the first time someone else had said what she hadn't told. It tightened something inside her. The next day, Mara found a second blue folder on her desk. It lay on top of the first like a lid. Inside, another photograph. This one taken from closer, as if whoever had taken the first shot had moved in. Her eyes were closed, of course, but this one had her mouth slightly open in a way that made the skin around the throat look wrong to pale. Too thin. The timestamp read 1:58 still the night before, but earlier than the others. Under the photograph was a single typewritten sentence. Do you see her? Mara's name was not used. The pronoun had a room inside it. People started to sleep at their desks. Anita fell asleep mid-email with her head on the keyboard. Julian nodded off while standing up and started to fall against a bookcase. Someone caught him. Hollis, on a conference call about fiscal forecasts, stopped mid-sentence and blinked as if waking from a dream. When he came back, he apologized for the glitch and never said why his voice had sounded so distant. Employees came in with dark rings under their eyes. The city outside the window had never looked so distant. Even the plants in the office, usually resilient to everything a corporate floor could throw at them, seemed to be leaning into the harsh pains, as if trying to escape. The photographs grew more specific. They began to arrive not in the morning but through the day, appearing on desks like small blue-bellied animals. Some were of people asleep at their desks, others of them on couches at home. One of Hollis in his car at 3:02 a.m., his face turned toward the passenger seat as if listening. The timestamps moved forward somewhere from the next day, as if the photographs could reach ahead and print the future onto glossy paper. News stories online made the rounds. Other offices, other cities. There were reports of similar photographs, of blue folders appearing in places with no connection to Halcyon. No one could say exactly when it had started elsewhere. The internet was a map of rumors. Someone posted a video of a mailbox being opened in a quiet suburb and a blue folder resting inside. Mara stopped trusting the hum of the building. She stopped trusting her phone. At 11:47 p.m. one night, a text arrived from an unknown number. Check the window. Another brought a low, digital playback of static that sounded, when it played, like breathing. They decided to track the printers exhaustively. It pulled spool logs, cross-checked timestamps, mapped IPs. They found one anomaly, a small intranet address that surfaced and vanished overnight, routing through a sequence of internal proxies like a trail of small stones someone had thrown across a stream and then taken back. At the center of that trail was a storage room in the basement no one used. It had a keypad that had been installed a long time ago and never logged a single access. The keypad showed no signs of recent use, but the door itself had a smudge of dust at the base that had been disturbed. That's where they print them, Reyes said. That's where whoever's doing this has to be. Lock the doors and set shifts. Anita refused to go. It's a basement, she said. Basements are for things that don't want to be seen. They went anyway. The basement smelled like dust and old glue. Fluorescent tubes on the ceiling buzzed and threw long shadows. The keypad blinked at them, patient and indifferent. Julian scanned the logs and tried a sequence of default codes. It clicked. The door opened. Inside, there were racks of old equipment, a tangle of cables, boxes with peeling labels, a printer that looked like it had been dragged from another era. Someone had made a room out of spare server racks and old monitors. In the center of the room was a chair, a plain metal chair with a pad, the kind you might see in an interrogation room. The chair faced a wall of monitors, a patchwork of different feeds. Every monitor showed a different view: a living room, a bedroom, an office, a street corner. Some feeds were black and white. Some were a moment later than others. One showed a motel room with the blinds half closed. Another displayed a child's bedroom with nightlights reflecting like stars. On one monitor, Mara saw her own bed. The camera angle was impossible. The view was from the ceiling, a bird's-eye photograph slice. Her bedroom on the monitor showed her in the exact position the photograph had depicted, but the timestamp in the corner read 3 hours in the future. She felt like the floor had tilted. Julian reached for the feed and the screen stuttered. On another monitor, someone was sleeping in an apartment 3 blocks away. A woman's hair lay across the pillow in a pattern no one else could have guessed. "How many of these are alive?" Anita whispered. "Some are," a voice said behind them. They turned. Hollis stood at the doorway. Gray suit rumpled like someone who had been awake too long, but there was someone else with him, a janitor from the night shift, his face in the half-light, his hands dirty with printer toner. He shrugged as if to say he hadn't meant to be there. He looked right at the monitors and then at them, like a man looking at the underside of a map. "You shouldn't be here," he said. No one answered. Around them the monitors hummed. A clock somewhere in the building clicked over to 11:58 p.m. Mara watched the monitor that showed her bedroom. On the feed, her figure turned its head. The hand twitched, fingers flexing like muscle memory. It was an image, a mimicry of life, but the mimicry had small errors. The shadow from an absent lamp fell wrong. A reflection in the window showed a doorway that did not exist in the real room. In the chair was a stack of blue folders. I sat on the lap of the chair as if someone had set it there to dry. Hollis moved toward the wall. He pulled a cable from a rack, and the screens spluttered. The feed of Mara's room froze on her face. For a half-breath, Mara thought she saw her own eyes on screen blink in sympathy. "Who is running this?" Julian demanded. Hollis didn't answer. He only picked up a folder, flipped it open, then let out a sound that could have been a laugh, and could have been a sob. "Do you see her?" he asked, and for the first time the pronoun was aimed like a spear. On the monitor, Mara's sleeping figure smiled. They left the room with one of the blue folders clutched in Julian's hands. It was warm, as if it had just been fed through a machine. Later, in a conference room that felt suddenly too small, they tried to rationalize the scene. There were explanations for everything: stolen feeds, an elaborate hoax, a viral marketing campaign gone too far. HR sent a brief email reminding everyone not to circulate the photos. It said support resources were available at 12:30 a.m. Mara found herself back at her desk. She didn't remember walking the stairs. She remembered, in the way you remember the scratch of a pen, only fragments, fluorescent buzz, the soft weight of a folder in her hand, the warm ache of her head. The office was not the office it had been earlier. Lights had been dimmed. A low fog of cool air lay over the floor. Someone had left a half-drunk coffee abandoned in the kitchen. There was a new photo on her desk. It lay on top of the blue folder like a challenge. The timestamp read 0:02, 2 minutes from now. Mara's hand shook so hard she folded the corner. The photograph showed her sitting in the metal chair in the basement room. She was alone in the picture, but behind her, in the glass of the rack of monitors, was a reflection, a figure standing just beyond the chair. The figure was close enough that if it leaned forward, the reflection would have been in her ear. She stood up. Her legs felt wrong, like someone had switched the wiring. A noise behind her, the soft scrape of metal on tile, pulled her attention to the doorway. Julian stood there with his own blue folder in hand, his mouth tight. "Mara," he said. I'm not what?" she asked. Her voice sounded small inside the empty office. "Sleeping," he said, because he wanted it to be true. At 0:02, the lights went out. The building sighed. The monitors in the security room went black. The conference room lost its glow. Something in the hum of the HVAC slowed and then stopped like a held breath. In the dark, everyone's pulse was a drum, the quiet filled with the smallest sounds. Someone's sock against carpet, the rustle of a jacket. Then something else creaked like the metal chair in the basement being dragged. Mara felt a pressure at the base of her skull, a tug like tide. She sat down hard because the world insisted she could not stand. The photograph in her hand became heavy, and the image in it wavered like a page in a tongue. She tried to keep her eyes open. Concentration became a physical act. She forced the lids apart as if prying open eyelids with small tools. Somewhere near her, a phone dropped and made the tiniest of noises. Something cold touched her neck. It was not the brush of a hand. It was the idea of a hand. It passed like someone exhaling close by. The hair along the nape of her neck stood up. Her breath fogged in front of her mouth, though the room was warm. Around her, people murmured. Anita's head bowed like a bud. Hollis's, the voice was somewhere audible and hollow. Counting breaths, Mara kept looking straight ahead because looking away felt as if she were giving permission. She smelled something, then a sewn in paper, a metallic scent that reminded her of the printers in the basement. For a moment she was certain she could see the glow of monitors reflected in everyone's eyes. A small screen light that no one else could name. A shadow slid across her desk. She turned her head. Julian looked like someone had taped a film over his eyes. His jaw moved in small, methodical ways. He held a blue folder limply. "Julian," she whispered. Her voice sounded like someone else's voice in a room. She'd only just entered. He didn't answer. The office clock in the corner of the wall ticked. 0:04, 0:05. Then it happened. The world flipped like a misprinted page. For a second it felt as if the building exhaled and an extra room opened up behind them. The air thickened and the light returned, but not the office light. The light was wrong. It came from screens. A glow filled the space, showing faces and beds and rooms that were someone else's life. The monitors from the basement were not just in the basement anymore. They were climbing, a smear of windows that now glowed in every reflective surface. People's eyes rolled back as if someone had tilted their heads. The monitors showed them, and then the monitors showed the monitors showing them. A recursion like a hall of mirrors. Mara saw herself on a monitor on a feed from the very room she stood in. The version of her on screen was slumped in the chair, its head lolled forward, mouth slightly open. But in the monitor's reflection, the slumped figure was not slumped. It sat perfectly straight and turned its head to look at the camera. It smiled. Mara felt her knees buckle. She reached for the edge of a desk, fingers scraping for purchase. Her palms came away with dust. She thought, "I will not sleep. I will not close my eyes. Not for one breath. Not one blink." The next thing she knew, she was waking up on the office floor. Sunlight was in the windows. Though not the harsh corporate light, the pale, breathy morning light that had not been there when she fell. Around her co-workers were stirring, blinking, rearranging chairs like people who discover their shoes have been moved. Anita began. "No one's been missing," Hollis said. His voice was steadier than the night. He checked his watch as if making sure his life had not been altered as a calendar might be. No one felt more than a hangover and a shadow of sleep in the back of the head. They tried to account for the night. They had minutes missing, hours unrelated. It reported several devices had experienced clock drifts. Server processes had restarted. Spoolers had swallowed and finally regurgitated hundreds of print jobs. The basement server showed a restart at 0:02, and an event in the log labeled unknown. Capture. Someone had taken photographs. Someone had routed the feeds. Someone had printed all the images that had terrified them and left them in neat, vivid stacks later. In a small group that met in the break room to eat cold slices of pizza and plan concrete actions, Julian opened his blue folder and slid a photograph across the table like a card you might deal at the end of a game. Mara looked. The photograph was of her again. This time, she was not sleeping. She was sitting at her desk at home, feet on the desk, a radio playing. The time stamp was tomorrow. On the back of the photograph, someone had written in thin, patient ink, "You didn't look away." Mara could not tell whether the writing addressed her or someone who had been standing behind her when the picture had been taken. That night, they set up better defenses. They unplugged monitors. They took apart printers and locked the basement. HR tried to contact suppliers, vendors, anyone who could explain how a network printer could be used to print images pulled from cameras with such specificity. The police took statements and then, somewhat apologetically, told them there wasn't a clear crime without evidence of forced entry. Halcyon's lawyer suggested that the company might be the subject of targeted harassment and recommended an internal PR statement. After all the meetings, amid the legal speak and the confidential memos, the photographs continued to arrive. They arrived in the most ordinary way, a hand upon a desk, a folder laid down. They arrived when people were alone in the elevator, when someone stepped into the kitchen for a drink. They arrived without fanfare. Mara learned to read the corners of the images like a person learning a language. A mark in the bottom edge meant the camera had been moved. A smudge in the glossy finish meant the print was warm. A faint glyph on the reverse tiny numbering that read like coordinates meant the photograph had been processed by a machine in the building. She kept one photograph for herself and hid it in the one place she still trusted, the pocket of her jacket, folded under receipts. Sometimes she would take it out and stare at it until the streetlight through her curtains blurred into a thin, watery smear. The image of her sleeping looked smaller in her hands. The time stamp felt like a clock. With its hands blurred, weeks passed that did not feel like weeks. The blue folders became part of their lives in the same way as fluorescent tubes and coffee rings. They no longer sparked the same immediate panic. They were a presence at the edge, an item to be checked for, like the weather, like the daily stock numbers. Then the photograph arrived that changed everything. One morning, just after dawn, Mara found a slim blue folder on top of the unlocked cabinet where she kept old contracts. There was no stamp. The folder opened easily. Inside was a single photograph and a single sentence. The photograph was a picture of the mirror chamber in the basement. The chair sat empty. The monitors were all on. In the bright center of the image, on the chair pad, there lay a tiny strip of white tape. On the tape, in faded blue ink, was a serial number. Someone had been there. And then, in small, typed letters beneath the photograph, the sentence, "We've been waiting." Mara put the photograph in her mouth like a coin. She wanted some metallic reminder of something solid. Her hands trembled. The office felt like a stage, whose curtains had been pulled back to reveal something waiting in the wings. She thought of the hospital bracelet in the first photograph, the little clue she had been too frightened to pursue. She thought of the way the watchers in the monitors smiled. She thought of the log entry that said capture. They could have left then. People left all the time, of course. Some did. But leaving felt like a surrender. It felt like admitting there was something they could not control. And besides, who would they tell? Who would believe them if they described a camera that could fold forward in time and put the future into their hands as a photograph? The day the last blue folder came, the office was quiet in a way Mara had learned to recognize as dangerous. A snowstorm, one they hadn't been expecting, overran the city, and the roads closed fast. People huddled at their desks, watching white outside the windows. The monitors at security hummed like a chorus. The blue folder sat on Mara's desk. Like an accusation, she opened it. Inside, a photograph of herself asleep at home. The timestamp read 2 a.m. tonight. Underneath was a typed note. Come to the basement, bring a chair. Mara felt a kind of laugh in her throat. The small, ragged sound of someone standing on a wire. She thought of all the small clues that had never added up to a picture. She also thought of something quieter. The photograph on the monitor the night the feeds hung that watched her. The smile. She took a chair. In the basement, they sat in a circle with chairs and folders and a resolve that had the shape of a question. Hollis lit a cigarette like it was the thing to do in an old movie. A half-moon of monitors stared back at them. The chair from the center sat, as always, facing the wall. No one wanted to be the first to sit in it. There was a superstition that doing so would be an invitation or a confirmation. People exchanged looks. Julian spoke first. Whatever it is, he said, it doesn't want to be observed. It wants other things. It feeds. Feeds, Anita repeated. The word felt like an anchor. Attention, Hollis said. He had an unpleasantly steady voice. Now it takes watches. It eats sleep. They argued theories until the snow smudged the windows with white and the pumps in the basement got louder. Their arguments were weapons against a truth that refused to shape. At 1:55 a.m. someone finally sat. Mara had thought it would be Julian. He had argued to take the chance. He had refused to sit just to prove everyone wrong. But when morning came to the threshold, with the sound of tires against the snow and the city muffled and small, Julian stood and walked to the chair. He smiled at them like a man giving away a secret. He sat. He turned in the chair slowly, as if listening for applause. On the monitors, the feed of his street hung like a gray photo. On another screen, the image of Mara at home blinked in a future timestamp. Julian sat and closed his eyes. The others counted their breaths. The furnace throttled. The monitors showed still frames and then small movements like a pulse. Julian's chest rose, fell, rose. The room smelled like toner and old paper. At 2 a.m. Mara watched the monitor that showed her own room. The sleeping version of her admitted a detail she had been trying to keep private. A hand. Julian's hand had slipped into the frame, a small shadow across the pillow. It rested near her throat. Mara's hand flew to her mouth. She wanted to shout. She wanted to throw the chair across the room. She wanted to pull Julian out of the chair before the image finished. On the monitor, the sleeping version of her turned its head. The head turned, and the face was not quite hers. It had the curve of her cheek and the color of her hair, but the eyes were too steady, too bright. "You all right?" Anita whispered. Her voice was a thread. Julian did not move. His breathing was regular. He looked at them with a face that might have been someone else's. The chair felt warm under him. "We should leave," Hollis said. His voice was a slip of a thing. The monitors smiled back like a theater audience. At 2:01, the photograph in Mara's pocket burned like a brand. The timestamp on the monitor reached 2:02 on screen. Mara's sleeping double opened her eyes and looked directly toward the camera. She smiled with a small, private satisfaction. The way a person smiles when they have won a game no one else knew had begun. Julian's face went slack. They watched his chest. It rose. It fell. It stopped. Mara ran. Air hit the basement stairs like a wall. Her lungs filled with cold and her head felt as if it were a bell. She tried to carry something with her, a folder, a chair, a reason, but hands closed on the rail and pulled, and the hall was a blur. She reached the top and burst into the office, but it was not the office she had left. It was full of monitors, reflected monitors, windows turned into screens. People stood in them with the hazy look of sleep behind their eyes. On a desk near the window, someone had left a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Mara pressed her palms to her temples until bright speckles floated. She tried to scream, but it was a feeble gulf sound like the call of some small bird. She turned and saw, at the far end of the office, closer than any of them should have been, a reflection. It was a person standing just behind her. She did not remember moving, did not remember anyone coming in. It was like a memory she had not earned. She felt cold breath at her ear. "Did you look away?" A voice whispered. Mara's ear bent as if listening to someone speak through a keyhole. The voice did not belong to anyone she knew. It was neither male nor female. It carried the soft intonation of a recorder speaking a line it had learned. She wanted to turn and punch, to smash the monitors with the heel of her hand. She wanted the world to have a center, a person to blame, a name to file under. She did the opposite. Mara looked at the person behind her. The face was blank as a cut of paper. The skin looked like a screen glow. When it smiled, it showed no teeth, just the suggestion of a mouth that knew how to lure. She took a step backward. Behind her, the office unfolded like a film in reverse. People woke. Chairs scraped back as if someone were lifting them. Julian was on the floor, chest moving, coughing air as if someone had returned his lungs to him. The figure behind Mara did not move. When she blinked, she found it gone. When she turned, the monitors were empty frames again. In the morning, after the city thawed and the world went back to the slow machinery of work, an email went round. HR had a new FAQ about privacy. IT had replaced the basement server. The police came and took the devices. Lawyers met in rooms that smelled like lukewarm coffee. Mara kept a photograph in her jacket. She could not explain why. Maybe it was a talisman. Maybe it was money in her pocket. She kept it like a person keeps a scar. Months later, she found one more blue folder under a stack of expense reports. It had been slid under the cabinet when no one was looking. Inside, a photograph of the conference room where they had guarded themselves. A time-stamped night. On the back, in ink small and familiar, the words, "You looked away first." Mara carried the folder to the window and held it up against the light. The city spread beneath her like a grid. She could have walked out then. She could have dropped the folder into the river. She could have called the police or the papers. She could have done any of those rational mortal things. Instead, she put the photograph into her jacket and walked to her desk. The office breathed around her. Phones chirped. Co-workers murmured. She sat down, turned on her computer, and opened her email. There was a new message waiting. No sender, no subject. A single line, typed and polite. "See you tonight." She looked up at the window. The light outside was ordinary. Somewhere down the corridor, someone laughed. A chair scraped back. The great building hummed as if nothing odd had happened. Mara slid the jacket off and folded the blue folder once more. She put it where she kept small things that might be needed. A pocket, a drawer, a place under the things you reach for. The dark. When night came, she made tea and left the curtains open. She sat in the glow and read a book she had never finished. She closed the book at a paragraph she did not remember reading. Her hand steadied. The lids grew heavy. On her desk. The photograph warmed. Outside. The city lights blinked. Inside. The monitors in the basement hum as they always did, quiet, patient, with their mirrors ready. She had learned one rule and held it like a compass. Do not look away, but the world is patient. It is, perhaps, what these things have in common with oceans and old machines and those who wait at doorways. They keep time. They watch you. Look, they wait for the moment your attention blinks. At midnight, she laughed. The small hysterical sound of a person laughing at herself, and then put the book down. She felt the chair under her begin to tilt. The room around her softened like a photograph that had been breathed on. In the dark, something else moved. The breath at her ear was not cold now. It had the shape of recognition. "You looked away first," the voice said. Mara felt her lids collapse like a page turning. Her last clear thought was practical and oddly absurd. She should have eaten dinner. The city kept its lights, as if nothing had shifted. The monitors in the basement recorded a new image. A woman relaxed in an armchair, a cup half empty on the table, a small blue folder on her lap. On a monitor in a room that had no right to be watching, a person sat up and smiled.